OWASP standards. And she said, I mean, it can be about something else. And I said, how about SOC? And shockingly enough, here I am with a presentation that's kind of mostly about SOC, but it's intentionally, well, you see it in a second, kind of intentionally.
Oh.
Okay, so when I started sharing slides, it muted me. Wow, I've never seen it do it. Okay, I'm gonna try it again. Just a second. Share screen.
I thought it was my computer.
So when I start sharing slides, it tells me I'm sharing audio, so I'm gonna be muted. Whoa, what happens here? So I'll try again. I'll try to see whether I need to mute the tab or something. Let me try it again. Okay. Okay, Chrome tab. So when I start sharing slides, it cut off my audio. So the solution, the solution I would implement for this is I'm gonna dial from a phone, and I'm gonna do audio from a phone and slides from a computer. So just a second. Wow, Zoom is weird.
Yeah, that's a new one. There was some kind of update when I started Zoom. Maybe it's a new feature.
When I share screen, so when I go share screen, present browser tab, it says, oh, because you're sharing audio, we're going to cut you off, and it mutes it.
It's a new feature, okay. Anton. Feature.
I bet it is, yeah. Okay, so
okay, can you hear me now?
That we can.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, okay.
I'm gonna. Good. Wow, that's fascinating. We learn something new about Zoom every day. Okay, so now presumably you can both hear me and see the slides as if by magic.
Yes, we can. Thanks, Anton.
So as I kind of promised, this one would be a little bit on the philosophical side, but I'll try to be practical where I can, because I hate some conceptual presses that say do the right thing, don't do the wrong thing. By God, I've seen enough of them. So this is sort of a mixture of me thinking about what we can do to improve some of the stuff in security operations, using lessons that many of the OWASP esteemed members would find familiar, because they sort of come from the development / application security / if you don't hate it, DevOps, and of course at Google we call it SRE. So the idea is that what can we borrow from these domains to improve the SOC? And the kind of the motivation for this was this article I read many years ago by the Google X lead, who basically said sometimes it's easier to improve something by a factor of 10 than by 10%. And this, of course, I wanted to argue with that because I'm kind of the person who looked at many efficiencies and processes and stuff like that. So it sounds like gradual change should be easier. But I'm finding out more areas inside the Security Operations Center that are sort of subject to that sort of surprising rule. So let's try to go and look for them together. Now, before we go there, I have to address the reminder about the SOC. Now, I've gotten a few arguments in social media, actually as late as last week, about the SOC. And the reason people want to argue with me about SOC is that there are definitely organizations and people who kind of predict that the SOC would die and we won't need a SOC. And there are many different directions why they bring this up. Sometimes they say that COVID killed SOC because you can't sit in the same room with people, or they say automation killed SOC, or they say, oh, we're going to shift so far left that we would fix all the security issues before we even write software. I mean, crazy stuff like this. So the reason why I like to kind of persist with trying to say we should make the SOC better is because, to me, SOC is really not about big screens and large rooms and whatever. Like, to me, SOC is the detection and response team. And somebody, and again, in the most recent argument, when somebody said SOC is going to die and here's what would replace it, they described what perfectly matches the vision of the modern SOC that I'm going to mention today, actually, among other things. So to me, when I think SOC, I don't think big screens, I don't think big rooms, I don't think expensive chairs. I think detection and response team. So to me, the primacy of team, primacy of people is quite central, and it's quite definitional when I think of SOC. Now, there are definitely people who think of SOC as a physical room, so they have to add different, adjectives to it, like to say, oh, we have a virtual SOC. Well, what does it mean? Well, that means people work from home. But what do they do? Well, they do security operations. They detect and respond. Well, then you have a SOC. Why add silly labels to it? Because frankly, during COVID times, almost everything then has to be virtual. I'm a virtual HR person. I work in virtual, marketing or something. So enough rambling. I think that this kind of my ways to prove that SOC is here to stay in some shape or form. It would evolve, modernize, whatever. But I don't think we'll truly go SOC-less. And people who say they go SOC-less probably really build what I would call a SOC, just build on very modern principles. And we'll highlight some of the principles here. But in my mind, and in my opinion, you wouldn't be SOC-less. You would just be running a SOC using today's modern standards. Now, most of you probably hate problem slides like hackers hack, threats threaten, and vulnerabilities, whatever they do, get found, I guess. But I still want to briefly touch on these because I like when people say, oh, there are so many attacks, threat landscape, blah, 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 and they go into rambling about ransomware or this or that. So to me, threats and attacks increases, expansions, changes are quite secondary to the fact that attack surface increases. And I don't want to go ramble about stuff that's not connected to the mission of this presentation, but think about it. Many of you have to defend the technologies that range from literally a mainframe from the 1970s to containers or to serverless that are circa 2020s. So we have to defend, at this point, maybe 50, for some companies, maybe 60 years of IT crap that accumulated in layers upon layers. So very few companies are like, oh, we have only modern IT. In fact, people sometimes look at Google and say, hey, Google, you were born in the 90s, so presumably you don't have any of the tech from before. Sure, we don't. But frankly, 90s is a long time ago. Google is 23, 24 years old. They can accumulate a lot of tech and a lot of tech layers, tech paradigms in the years. So to me, the attack surface changes is much more important than the attack changes. Just a lot more stuff to do. Like just recently, somebody was complaining on Twitter that they have to write some kind of a exploit for mainframe. And I'm like, that's not surprising to me at all, because you may write container exploits today, but you may write mainframe exploits tomorrow. That's IT at a large company. So this forces us as defenders, as blue teamers, kind of change what we do, because sometimes we were comfortable defending servers in the DMZ, and suddenly we have cloud, mobile, IoT. We still have mainframes. We still have internal applications. So to me, this is one reason why we can just like increase slightly, because the number of stuff we have to defend increases much faster. Now, you probably also hate people talk about talent shortage, and they just went through hiring announcements. And of course, because the Amazon guy said they're hiring, we have to say we're hiring too. So yes, we have good security positions at careers.google.com. But the point is, to me, the talent shortage is more important than the people shortage. And what I mean by this is, when I'm in my Gartner days, I've spoken to somebody from, I'll obscure some details, a company from New Zealand. And they said, you know what? We don't have enough tier 3 analysts to hire. And I said, what do you mean hire more? And they said, no. They're not enough in New Zealand. They're like run out on the island. So if you're starting a new SOC, you have to poach from other people or, well, get people to move to New Zealand, which I guess during COVID times maybe is not that hard. But the point is that sometimes we don't have the people that fit with the organization. So you need to grow, do other stuff, but it takes time and you have threats today. So to me, talent shortage pushes SOC to automate, pushes SOC to do other stuff. And some people say it pushes SOC to outsource, but like, do you think your outsourcer can like wave a wand and like kiss a frog or whatever, and like suddenly a bunch of good people show up at their door? No, they're fishing in the same pool for talent. So in that sense, outsourcing is not really the answer. It's maybe part of the answer. And as more people like, well, myself ramble about how you need to do more detection, guess what we have more of? Signals and alerts and things. So sometimes we get a little bit less or a little better alerts, but ultimately as we rebalance, as many companies rebalance from excessive focus on prevention, they do more detection. And that means they do more signals that needs to go to first machines and then humans. So to me, these three forces that we highlighted in some white paper we wrote a couple of years ago really push SOC to change. You can't just say, let's just keep doing what we're doing and more or less things will work out. To me, they would not. And I'll highlight some of the ways we can actually change them so that they do. Now, this is another detour, and as you noticed, maybe I didn't have enough coffee or something, but I'm a bit of a rambling presenter today. But at the same time, this is a fun topic, so we're going to go talk about fun things. So one thing that really broke many SOCs, in my experience, is having to do DNR, detection and response monitoring in the cloud, in public cloud. So to me, I've noticed people who really lived a perfectly happy life with like syslog and like checkpoint firewall, log retrieval, and like Windows logs and probably nothing else, and they were happy. And suddenly they're given APIs to pull, they're given other things that they don't quite understand fully to get logs. They get, you know, JSON instead of syslog, and they get all sorts of weird binary stuff and, you know, packet mirroring and things that you know, ourselves here at Google and the esteemed people at our other two clouds produce for login. So this is all different, and that means tools change, practices change, volumes go up. There's a lot of licensing models that don't fit. I'm going to go read the list. If you want to read the list, there's a blog that I've written on this a few months ago. But the reason why I'm highlighting it here is that SOCs that sort of mostly adapted to this type of onslaught of threats, changes to landscape, lack of talent, then truly tripped and some of them fell when cloud showed up. To me, one funny thing is the whole alien detection context. And I don't mean you have to detect aliens in the cloud, and no, cloud is not run by aliens. But the idea is that there's a lot of contextual artifacts that replaced things like, oh, what server, what IP address is this server? What's the MAC address? What floor is it on? What rack? Who owns it? Like a lot of this stuff got wiped from the data center world to the cloud world. And there's stuff that sometimes I read, funny enough, I was reading Azure documentation the other day, and I've seen, like, I couldn't understand some words. Like, clearly they refer to some kind of a label they attached to a server, but I didn't know what it meant. So to me, it would be hard to detect threats if I have to first go pick up a dictionary and understand words. So that indicate like something about the machine that's probably been attacked. So enough rambling about this. The point is that this called for more changes that needs to happen in the SOC. And some people who are maybe fans of gradual improvement decided to say, okay, let's pick a typical SOC and let's figure out in areas where it can constantly improve by a little bit. Now, this is my sort of classic SOC slide that I've used elsewhere. And at the bottom, you see things that to me are very characteristic of classic SOCs that were built maybe in the big banks, maybe late 1990s, other organizations, sometimes early 2000s. In 2002, specifically, there was this pretty well-written paper written by some people from ArcSight that outlined their vision for a SOC. It was a really good paper. And I've seen SOCs that are built straight to that paper, but today. And the paper was written in 2002. So they built the best of the best of the best in terms of people, process, and tech of 2002 SOC in 2021. Let's not, throw too many curses, and it doesn't work too well. I'll put it this way. It's very tame Anton here. So imagine that you have a SOC that has 10% lower false positives, and you do 10% faster alert triage, and your SIM is maybe 10% cheaper and 10% faster. And your analysts and people who write the alert rules or detection rules maybe talk 10% more. Like they have, instead of one lunch a month, they have like one lunch every 3 weeks. That's even more than 10%. The point is that improving some of the things, and maybe your alert pipeline, maybe your logs flow faster, maybe your new sources are integrated 10% faster. All these things just don't seem to be enough against the things I highlighted: attack surface, changes to environments, changes to threats, talent shortage. So to me, it sounds like if you push the classic SOC really hard, if you hire the best efficiency consultants, if you hire, Gartner and Deloitte and whoever else who knows about SOCs, you would still get incremental improvements that would rapidly fall behind. So what can we do? Especially what can we do if you are running a more traditional SOC, maybe with significantly outsourced, and you start to see that improving things gradually, even if rapidly, but gradually doesn't quite cut it. So good number of years ago, actually, I started thinking about this back in the Gartner days, and then I continued here at Chronicle and then at Google. I tried to organize some of the principles or ideas, and some of you who've seen me present before probably saw some version of that slide, maybe with different colors. I'm not going to go through that because I have some other fun stuff, how to actually journey to this. But to me, things like a more fluid organization, no hard tiers, organizing around threats, not around alerts. It's not about like an alert efficiency pipeline. It's a detection and response team. Ultimately, you need to detect and respond to threats, not just crunch through alerts. Like, to me, that's a means to an end. Of course, there's some hunting involved. In the more junior, maybe smaller SOCs, there's less. In larger, more enlightened SOCs, there's more. People go beyond logs. Of course, there are EDR technologies deployed to observe what's on the endpoint. There's other stuff. In the near future, I see more in-app observability stuff coming to a SOC, so there will be more fun things to watch in the next 2 to 3 years. There's automation, usually in the form of SOAR, Security Orchestration Automation Response Tools. As a funny aside, this acronym was coined at Gartner, and the person coined it without thinking of what the letters would mean. He just loved it, and he kind of fell in love with it. And then Gartner put some words behind the acronym, and then people kind of hated the words. They wiped them and put other words. So today, SOAR stands for Security Operation Automation Response, but initially it stood for something else. But the person who invented it is still there, probably happily living an analyst life. So the point is that SOAR or some other automation platform. People usually in this modern SOC, there's a lot more analysis of what's being detected. And it doesn't mean that you print out a copy of MITRE ATT&CK and look at it and say, yeah, we got it, and then just like throw it out. There's a lot more to coverage depth and kind of detection in depth, what I've called it in the past, where you're detecting something, and what happens if you fail? Well, you detect it somewhere else. Well, what if you fail there? Well, then we'll catch it on exfil. It may be too late, but the point is there's more analysis than thinking about it, not just reliance on the vendor content and detection logic. Now, TI, I mean, not every SOC or not every security operations team, detection and response team produces TI, threat intelligence, but there would be some of the internal intel that's flowing into detection. So to me, this is probably a feature of a much more enlightened, much larger, much more well-resourced SOC, but it's still there in some shape or form. It's not just buying TI feeds, threat intel feeds, and just like throwing them into detections. And then some use for third-party services is there. Now, it may sound kind of funny because people used to think of, do we outsource or do we have a SOC? Do we go to an MSSP or do we go to some or other organization like who that helps us build a SOC? So it's kind of in-house or not in-house. Today, I see a lot more of the top-tier SOCs are basically both, and they end up being hybrid SOCs that do some insourcing, some outsourcing, and some mixed, sourcing and documentation and whatnot. So this brings up a story that's somewhat different to a traditional, a bunch of people sitting, watching the screens, watching the SIM, checking alerts, pushing the buttons. So some companies, again, you probably read, back to the SOC list analogy, you probably read the pieces written by Netflix 3 years ago, and there are other companies that sort of say they're SOC list. To me, many of them practice many of the same principles. And of course, the principles kind of led them to believe they have a different type of an organization, not a SOC. To me, it's still a modern SOC, but it's a SOC that's built to withstand the forces we described. So this is all kind of fun and possibly slightly interesting for some of you. But what's more interesting to me is how to actually journey there, how to get there. If you are mostly in the help desk inspired SOC, a bunch of people sitting around the SIM waiting for the alert. When the alert shows up, the level 1 clicks and says, oh, I don't know what it is. I'm going to escalate. And then level 2 says, oh, okay, I think I know what it is. I'm going to close it. So like traditional SOC processes of that sort may not cut it. But how do you journey from a classic SOC to a SOC that can withstand the forces I highlighted here? So that's what the presentation is about. So I wanted to outline a bit of a framework. And to me, the framework here is focused not just on like what buttons to push, and I will give you some of that, but on kind of a journey from a normal SOC that's built largely on the late 1990s, early 2000s principles to some kind of organization. If you decide to not call it a SOC, fine, I'm not going to argue with you, that can in fact work with threats of today, with scales of today, with threat landscapes, and of course with assets of today as well. Now, this is a kind of a 100,000-foot view, and there's a more detailed views coming. But to me, I'm going to outline some of the directions and pointers here. And also, while back in the Gartner days, I was a huge fan of the 5-tier maturity diagrams, from 1 to 5. Here, I figured it may be a little overkill, so we kind of called it tactical, strategic, and transformational. Big words, but the idea is that tactical, you're kind of in the improving by 10%, but you're improving in a direction that would get you somewhere else, not just at 10% better and then another 10%. Strategic is kind of more about where you're starting to make big changes, possibly incurring costs, possibly incurring friction and resistance at times. And transformational to me is where you end up in, I would not call it SOC-less, but in a model that is similar to what our esteemed colleagues at other cloud providers do, maybe at large social media companies, to a lesser extent at large banks. So you'd arrive at a SOC that's built, or an organization that's built to withstand the threats of today and tomorrow at the scales of today and tomorrow. Now, some of you may ask, is this copied from Google? And it is not really copied from Google, because some things here are very much copied from Google. We do a lot of our own TI. So there's a lot of threat intel creation. And contrary to popular opinion, we actually tend to, please don't laugh at me, like AI ML a bit less than some of the maybe overeager security organizations that are buying a bunch of tools that do AI ML. So not all of it would, the transformational level isn't just like a carbon copy or a like cut and paste of Google. There's some ideas that I've picked from our operation, some ideas I've picked from other companies, and some ideas I've encountered back in my analyst days in hallway conversations or whatever else. So let's go talk through the specifics of some of these journey elements. So lots of words here, but kind of ignore most of them. The direction here, the big part of the direction is the point about removing the wall between people who click on the alerts and respond to alerts, who are kind of quote unquote classic SOC analysts, and people who actually make alerts happen. In a more progressive company, they would be called detection engineers, but they may be just, content authors. It's an old ArcSight term from way back. Or it may be a consultant who writes detections, or it may even be some kind of outsourced partner. The point is that in some SOCs, and as late as last week, somebody told me, well, in our bank, we have to separate analysts and engineers because there's some kind of separation of duty argument for why people who write detections cannot see them being used. And I said, wow, that's thoroughly idiotic. Your auditors cannot possibly tell you, have a bad SOC, miss attacks. But ultimately, that's what it sounds like. And if you can follow a certain route to break it, here's how you do it. The point is that people who design alerts and people who respond to alerts, in case of Google, are the same people. There's no analyst and engineer separate roles. These are the people who kind of pursue the threat actor, so to say, from research to detection to, if the detection triggers, to triage, and they may help out with IR, with incident response. So how do you journey from a more normal model where you have analysts sitting in chairs and you have detection people writing detections once in a while? I mean, it's either rotation or just close collaboration, whatever else. the point is that you stop thinking, the people who watch the screens, if you have screens to watch, would stop thinking of themselves as kind of consumers of alerts built by little monkeys or little gnomes somewhere or by a vendor. They're kind of much more invested in the detection success. That means they co-create detections, and then ultimately these are the same people. So this is one path that I'm tracing through this that was became very clear to me back in the late in my Gartner tenure, and like it became really clear to me in my Google days when I saw people do it really well, and I see people push this model kind of all the way to 11, and that model works. There's definitely challenges. You may have to invest in some different type of personnel. You may have to run a little different processes, which I would highlight a little later. But ultimately, that model works, and that model allows you to push some of the detection creation to a much higher standard, and ultimately automate it so that you won't need level ones click and escalate all the time. Because like, why is somebody's job to look at the alert and say, I don't know what it is, escalate? Like, why is this a job? Like, why is this even a task? Why can't machines say, I don't know what it is, human here? Like, I mean, of course I'm making a joke, but the point is that it's still kind of strange when you think about it. Now, another thread through this is that sometimes in some companies, I've seen the alerts go to a person who is the closest to the issue being resolved. And again, if you reread the classic Netflix, SOC list kind of a treatise or paper, you would see a lot of that. And I've seen companies where this is a big part of the SOC charter, and I've seen companies that are where it's kind of a minor part. The point I'm making is that sometimes, especially with application access, I'm a SOC engineer, I see an alert that says such and such accessed application, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know who's such and such. I don't know what this application does. I don't know how important it is. I need to do a lot of research. And it's not threat research. It's kind of like my organization research. And frankly, why am I doing this? Why can't somebody build a system that would do that research, because it's all kind of lookups, and send this alert to the person who actually knows what to do with it? Now, an objection to this is, of course, you sometimes want to send it to a security team and not to the system owner, because system owner may know what it means, but he may not have the threat context to judge it. So to me, this is where this model is kind of tuned to have the more collaboration between security team and the asset owner. But the point, it can't just be a junior SOC analyst that says, I don't know what the system is, escalate. Level 2 would say, oh, well, this user seemed to be from this org and the app seemed to be doing this. I don't know what it means. And then level 3 would have to do all this running around, screaming and asking people and calling them on the phone or on Slack or whatever. So to me, to avoid this is building the process so that sometimes alerts just land in the lap of a security team and in the asset owner. You probably have seen some descriptions of that in other materials. The third theme is going to be really weird. And the theme that I kind of pushed our team here a little bit on, and I said, I've spoken to 3 people who do this stuff here, and they all told me that they have to have a clear boundary to manage work-life balance. And I'm like, why are you talking to me about work-life balance? Give me the threat and tell procedures or something. And they said, well, no, because you won't have any threat and tell procedures if your people leave, and they leave because they have to work too hard. And they have to work too hard if you don't think about it. So to me, this is really strange sometimes, but I also understand how scaling the infrastructure by a factor of 10 cannot lead to either you hiring 10 times more people because you don't have money, or to have your people work 10 times more because there's not enough hours. So to me, this type of boundary work-life protection is interesting because it seemed to be noted by some of our engineers and SOC leaders as a critical reason why we are succeeding with the volume of threats that's kind of unthinkable. I'm going to bring this up here and leave it with you. I know some of you who are in security operations centers or close to that would sort of say, well, we can't do it. We kind of have to run faster, but you can't run faster all the time. You have to run faster and then take a break. Sorry, this is kind of a fact of life. Now, some of you have seen the framework and said, it's a little philosophical. What do we actually do? So for people, process, and tech, I'm going to give you this type of more fuzzy frameworky stuff that gives ideas, and some more practical stuff, such as these slides, of which you'd have 3. So if you remember one thing, I will still keep pushing the first one. if you have people who respond to alerts and you have people who make alerts happen, they have to become much closer friends, work together, be rotated, and they may eventually be the same people if you want to push the model to the max. Tasks that shouldn't be done by humans. Again, some of you probably saw this in many SOAR vendors' marketing materials, and SOAR vendors keep pushing this button, automate routine tasks, automate routine tasks. There's a lot of work involved, but ultimately they're right. You do have to automate routine tasks because some stuff just isn't meant to be done by humans. Humans shouldn't go spend time looking stuff manually in VirusTotal and then connecting it through some spreadsheet to some stuff that they got from a sim. That should be done somewhere by an automated system. So to me, these are the two highlights from the others. I'll probably leave it at that because there are more fun stuff to share. Process sounds dry and boring, but to me, it's kind of what makes this type of a modern SOC model work. So that's why I'm going to spend some time here. Now, improving alert triage is something that I've seen, funny enough, not SOCs don't pay enough attention to. Now, if I have an alert, there's usually a lot of kind of busy work slash jumping through hoops, looking at multiple screens, doing stuff like that, that kind of can be engineered out. So to me, the theme here is that you look at processes and you see what can be engineered to be done by machines or to be more streamlined when it's done by humans. So to me, you don't have to have a kind of a coherent fusion of hunting, detection, engineering, and detection. Like this is sort of like the ultimate end of the journey for this, that you don't just click on alerts and escalate or resolve them. You sort of use alert knowledge to improve detection. You use what you don't see in alerts to start hunting. You see hunting results to engineer detections. That's a kind of quote unquote the best way to do it, but it's also a costly way and it implies a degree of threats that not all of you may face. I would say that if somebody comes to me with a decent SOC and says, Anton, what should we do? And they tell me like a decent classic SOC model, I would still tell them the one thing you can do is really understand how you triage alerts and to make it better, and to make it better down the automating some things, enriching some things, adding more tools, removing some tools. So to me, this is where you probably have the biggest savings. Somebody came to me, actually multiple somebodies came to me and they said, well, in our SOC, we spent 40% of time dealing with phishing alerts. And once they walked me through the phishing processes, the procedures they have, I realized that maybe 95% of them can be done by machine and by a machine that they can simply buy by giving a SOAR vendor money and essentially using a near intact, near unmodified canned playbook from a vendor. So to me, it sounded like a pretty rapid win because they ended up with technology they can implement, and they ended up reducing their phishing response time from 40% to some kind of single digits, and at a fairly minimal effort. Of course, playbook customization is always an effort with automation. Now, ultimately, the guiding light that I want to highlight here is that these three letters, SRE, Site Reliability Engineering, which is kind of Google's unique distilled brand of DevOps. At least that's how I explain it to outsiders, well, like myself. The point is that if you have processes that are mostly involved with putting alerts from one bucket and grabbing alerts from one bucket and putting them into another, that process doesn't really do anything. It doesn't save you, it doesn't make you more secure. And there is enough that you can hand to people who are building the SOC, who are developing the SOC, so that enough of that type of process can be engineered in a system. And that's why you would stop being 90% alert pushers. You'd start being 50% alert pushers and 50% builders of tech that help you push alerts and hunt and detect and do other stuff. This is, again, kind of high level, but the idea is still very solid and it's very clear what's going on. How to do it? Well, first thing is how not to do it. I've seen enough people who read some kind of a cool article from somebody about hunting and they want to go hunt and they don't even have log collection handled, or they do have log collection, but it's all raw logs with no context and everything just loses context in days. So do that. I mean, don't do that. Rather, figure out how to improve alert triage first. Now, the other big point here is of course, number 3. Drive an approach where half of your time, half of your SOC team time, everybody, is dedicated to engineering stuff, and I don't mean writing code, engineering solutions that would save humans from doing all the work. And again, I've seen examples where it was done to the extreme, where one analyst handles, indirectly one analyst handles millions of alerts because the analyst doesn't really handle them. Analyst writes stuff that then handles millions of alerts. To a very manual approach where you talk about like, hey, how many alerts can you handle an hour? 2. Oh, 2 alerts an hour for a human? It sounds okay, but then think about a very large company that may have millions of alerts even after tuning and filtering. 2 an hour is never gonna fly. So you need to build stuff that makes it, how about 200,000 an hour? And of course, humans wouldn't look at all of them, but humans would build logic that would deal with them. That to me is the only way to go in this case. I would probably spend less time on tools simply because I'm pretty sure vendors do a decent job explaining how you have to buy stuff. Now, one thread from this slide is the thread from kind of reduced relevance of SIM and log analysis. And again, of course, me being an old SIM hand for friggin' almost 20 years now, it sounds kind of scary. I maybe don't want to talk to you about how SIM is becoming less important, but hey, SIM is becoming less important because there's other stuff to do. Of course, there's EDR, endpoint detection and response. There's NDR or NSM. There's network side monitoring. In the future, there will be a lot more deeper in-app monitoring, all this observability use case for security that's coming. But to me, the thread is logs matter. Logs still matter. Logs will still matter. But other visibility angles, EDR, NDR, application stuff would matter more. Maybe not NDR. NDR may matter less as we encrypt networks and do other stuff. But ultimately, it can't just be people sitting and watching the SIM, because SIM is mostly logs, and we would need more than logs. Now, I have this empty line that says cover cloud environments. Hey, solve problems, do a good thing, don't do bad things. That sounds very vague. However, what's behind this line is that cloud has come to many companies, it's coming to many others. And to me, the fact that things changed a lot in how they're done in the cloud providers, like typical cloud users, by quote unquote cloud natives, would teach all of us in SOCs and security operations how to do things. So to me, in that sense, cover cloud doesn't just mean get logs from GCP and Amazon and Azure. It may mean learn some of the operational practices that the cloud provider use and copy them to a SOC, and or use more cloud backended tools, because ultimately my impression is that cloud backended tools, the SaaS tools, would win over the long term. So if you're still buying servers to install an EDR backend, it's probably a good time to stop doing it, or it's a good time to think about stopping doing it if you can't stop doing it. Another angle on the tool, I don't know, I have AI ML here, but to me, I have it in the later stages, and I've seen successes with the non-rule-based detections, but I've also seen really robust, really effective rule-based operations that detect a lot more, and frankly, with a lot better results. So sometimes I don't want to sell ML short, but I also don't want to be an excessively optimistic booster of ML. Now, the action items, more specific things to do. So I did talk a little bit about how SIM and log analysis is a bit less relevant, but don't discard a SIM or a UBA. You would still need it. You would still need some form of log analysis. If you hate the term SIM, keep in mind that you would still be looking at logs in 10 years, most likely. Expand visibility. I mean, to me, the most fun part that's coming is, of course, something that comes from inside the apps. On the tooling side, if you're buying tools with backend to data center appliances, be aware that the SaaS tools would win in the end. Now, I talk some with, I talk a little bit with some European clients, European users of the cloud. And I know that here we are in Austin, not in Europe, but the cloud resistors exist, and they kind of argue and say, oh, I can't trust the cloud vendor, or I can't do this and I can't do that. But imagine that at some point, say in 3 years or more, the effectiveness of the SaaS tool, cloud backended tool, whether it's EDR, SIM, or whatever, would be so much more and so much higher than a traditional tool, then you would sort of not be able to say, do I use a mechanical typewriter, or do I use a Neuralink to copy my thoughts on a computer? Like, the gap would be that big. And to me, the desire to say, I'm going to use on-prem, well, in this case, your board have to say you're negligent, because you're ultimately letting attackers win. This sounds like vendor propaganda, and I'm aware of that, but I'm starting to see examples where because the cloud backended or SaaS tools have more data, have more algorithms, have more capability to run stuff, and can deliver all of that at lower cost. It kind of points at the fact that vision is coming, and you wouldn't just be, horse and buggy versus car. You'd be kind of like a horse and buggy versus starship, or like the gap would become so huge that people who say, no, I want on-prem, would be like, okay, really? Why would you say that? Like, you'd have this judgmental looks from the community when they do that. This time would definitely come. Now, you may not like SOAR. You may think that you're gonna go tomorrow and write your own SOAR before your morning coffee. And some people have done it and live to tell the tale. But ultimately, for most organizations, to me, a commercial SOAR is the answer as the central automation platform. Of course, there are some open source-ish tools that are like SOAR. You feel free to use them. But the point is that you're likely not doing your own scripts for automating SOC comprehensively. You're buying something or you're configuring something. And again, on ML, it's not a presentation about ML, but one point I want to make is that over the years of studying this in security, I've grown to be a short-term ML skeptic and a long-term ML optimist. So to me, this is the position I arrived at after agonizing, dealing with vendors, dealing with end users in different roles. I feel like ML today, machine learning today, has great auxiliary roles, but it clearly isn't magic. Can I envision situations where ML, in fact, is magic and it delivers some kind of 1000x results? I can envision that, but I haven't seen it. So I've seen improvements, but I haven't seen magic, and I've looked pretty hard. So this is that, but we kind of went through some of the pointers here, like what can possibly make your SOC grow 10x. Like, to me, automate some of the automation, some of the removing barriers between analysts and engineers, building automations at a much more rapid scale, dedicating more time to automation, improving triage, and then moving to other activities, following the approach where you spend more time with building, defining detection, and building playbooks for doing stuff. These, to me, are decent, high value and sometimes high value and high effort results to deliver the 10x improvement in a SOC. But this is like, I stole this chart from somebody in marketing, I'm sure, because it looks fuzzy, and don't read it. The slide here is really about the headline. The headline here is that sometimes you 10x the SOC by doing stuff not in the SOC, by doing stuff that's outside the SOC. And of course, my favorite example lately has been our experience with phishing. Like, clearly our quote unquote SOC, we don't call it that, but our comparable team doesn't spend any time on phishing because we don't really have phishing. And so we didn't 10x phishing response. We infinity x phishing response by not having phishing. Now, some of the dramatic improvements in the SOC happened by doing hygiene in a different manner. And I have to drink. I only have tea because I'm going to say zero trust. Next time I'll drink a beer. But because of things like well-implemented zero trust, we pushed out some of the typical hygiene issues out. And so to me, they take zero SOC time. They don't take reduced time. They take no time. So to me, sometimes the most dramatic improvements kind of in a SOC are done by things changing outside. And it may be connected to different approach to application security, more integrated vuln management, stuff like that. And again, phishing using MFA, stopping phishing using MFA and other approaches. So to me, this is notable because sometimes if you make a perfectly magical SOC that you spend $10 million on, but you don't change anything outside, you still won't have 10x results. You might have minus 10% results despite all the spend because things around the SOC would just be like badly broken. So I wanted to leave time for questions, and I do have to run at the end of the hour. So here, one pointer, one reminder is that if SOC is a detection team, then SOC lives on. There's no SOCless in that view. There's no, oh, machines would do it, or ML unicorn would come and fix it, or we're going to shift so far left and all issues would disappear. So to me, detection team would exist. And if we are talking again in 2031, and I am talking about hopefully not similar, but equivalent stuff, that means I was right. And if not, then, well, I was wrong. That also can happen. Modernizing the SOC may mean many things, but to me, ultimately, the mission is still better detection and response. So to me, if you're investing in better PCI compliance reporting for your SOC, you may be doing something valuable and valued by your business, but you're sort of not improving the SOC core mission. So to me, lately, I've been kind of more down on the overstuffed SOCs. Again, I need a picture of an overstuffed SOC here, because what happens is that if SOC has detection mission, compliance mission, vulnerability mission, patching mission, hygiene mission, prevention mission, tool management mission, it has no mission, and it probably won't be excellent in anything. So to me, narrower SOC mission is better rather than worse. So I've mentioned the A word, automation, too many times, so I'm just going to skip it. But to me, SOC is catching up with modern IT in regards to automation. So you're not just doing something weird. It's maybe weird for security, but it's really not weird for IT. Now, if you remember one thought from this whole discussion is coming from the point about kind of DevOps or SRE in this case, when you're trying to improve SOC, you're not going to ops your way to success. You can only dev your way to success. What I mean by this is that improving operations would never give you 10x. It would only give you 10%. But doing dev and doing content development, doing much more tighter integration, detection, response, creation of detections, hunting, intel analysis together does have 10x potential. So it's I'm using DevOps as a verb here. You're DevOps, you're detection engineering. You introduce the same principles, and then you run with it, and that's an idea with a big 10x potential here. Well, big 10x is what, 11x? I don't know. Sorry, this was maybe a marketing exaggeration. Now, another advice that I probably didn't touch enough is about focusing on the detection content in new environments. Like if you're great detecting threats against Unix and Windows, you may not have anything with dealing with threats against containers or microservices. So to me, this is key. I mean, I'm doing the same. I've have to learn a lot of things around how our container stacks function and how container threat detection works here, because a lot of this is just alien and it's not quickly copied, it's not quickly mapped to your knowledge of like Windows threats and Unix threats. Finally, and again, this sounds like a little bit of a vendor propaganda, but do discard the tools that don't fit the practices of the modern world, whether these are IT practices or AppSec practices or security operation practices. Because to me, some teams have journeyed to the cloud with all their on-premise baggage, and I mean processes and skills and tools. And the result is kind of too unwieldy to handle. Like you can't accelerate if you have to figure out how to capture every packet that passes between virtual machines in GCP. Now, can you capture every packet that passes between virtual machines in GCP? Yes, you can. We're going to charge you some money for it, but the point is that you can do it. Now, there are many more ways to achieve likely the same outcome by different means, but if you insist on copying your data center lateral movement monitoring to a cloud, you can do it. It would just be very costly and very unwieldy, but it's doable. So to me, this is about like discarding tools that don't fit. Is another avenue to acceleration. It may not give you 10x, but it gives you decent acceleration in this type of a journey to catch up. Now, this is my final slide. Here it's not clickable, but I'm pretty sure when I'll share the deck, you would be able to look at this. If you want to read one thing, okay. If you want to read one long thing, read the paper that's linked at the second link. This is long story how the title appeared, but this is a paper that highlights some of the stuff I shared with more details and more implementation advice. So this is this link. And if you only have time to read something short, then read this blog, Kill SOC Toil, Do SOC Eng. It's kind of a cool title for that. And this gives you at least some practical advice on this one idea of bringing more DevOps/SRE practices into a SOC. Other stuff is fun, but some of you may have seen it before. Thank you very much for your attention, and we have 8 minutes for questions. How about that?
So if you got any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Great time to do that.
While everybody's thinking of questions, I just want to take the opportunity to thank you, Anton. Really appreciate
Sure. Oh, sorry. Hear me? Actually, you got cut off now in the middle.
Sorry, I fingered it. Thank you. Really appreciate
Of course. Perfect.
So how many folks here are SOC analysts and see this as some great information? Anyone? I'm an operations guy, so from my side, that was some great stuff, and it does definitely say the whole SRE concept is being spread through everything, and it shows that that's the only way you can scale this.
Yep. Perfect. Well, if you have questions later, I'm not hiding. I'm easy to find, so feel free to drop me an email or a message, or argue with me on Twitter. That's fun.
Thanks for doing this, Anton. Thanks again.
Perfect.
And
of course. Yeah.
And everyone else, so hopefully see us LastCon. If not, we'll really reconvene back in January. So thanks again for attending, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.